On this episode of Board Games with Scott, flicking games. Well, hi there. Welcome back to Board Games with Scott. I've been gone for a while and I've been thinking quite a bit about the show and what I might want to do with it if I decide to continue it. And well, I've had some ideas and some thoughts. For those of you that saw my April 1st episode, I communicated through humor there about what I'd been feeling. Is that I recognized I was just doing the same thing again and again, doing the same formula. And while it's a good formula and it works, there's a lot of other people out there right now that are using this formula. A number of folks have picked up the torch and are now doing board game reviews, and they're giving you enough information to let you know if you want to purchase that game. So I thought, well, you know, I really just don't want to be one of the masses churning out the same thing that lots of other people are, because then it just becomes a race, you know. Oh, who can be the first one to churn out the video on this? I know a number of you have said, well, Scott, you do it really well. Well, yeah, I do, but I got kind of bored with it, to be honest. When I went to that shorter form video, I found that that was boring to me, just knocking them out. You know, that's not what I want to do. So I've thought for a while about what I'd like to do. Now, I still want to introduce new games, and that's one of the things I enjoy doing with this show, is when I find a game out there that is new or one that people might not have heard of, I want to try and introduce it to you. But I've been thinking a lot about how I'm going to do that, and so what I'm going to do is change things up a little bit. And there's something in education that's called Bloom's taxonomy. And the idea of Bloom's taxonomy, it's 6 levels. It takes you from just knowing stuff to being able to describe stuff, and takes you up through different levels. There's synthesis and analysis and evaluation. And the idea is that when you're teaching somebody something, you want to start them at the knowledge level. You want to start them learning facts, but then take them up through these levels of learning until at the top they're able to evaluate and to really synthesize, evaluate. It moves you up that scale. And so that's what I'm going to be doing with Board Games with Scott. I'm going to be moving out of the description category where, you know, I would just describe one game to you, and moving more into the compare, contrast, synthesize, and evaluate categories. So my idea is that I will be each episode doing some sort of a more in-depth discussion of some aspect of games. I found in my past some of the things that have gotten some of the best feedback were times like when I reviewed a number of different adventure games right before talking about Prophecy, or when I did an overview of some train games before talking about 18XX. And so that sort of thing is not being done right now. And so that's what I'm going to do. Now, for those of you out there that are hardcore gamers, you're going to not get as much out of the show anymore, because what I'm not going to do is teach you the games. That's what I'm not doing any longer. That's not going to be the purpose of the show. There are other shows out there doing it. There's quite a few out there. If you go to BoardGameGeek.com and search for the show, if you look under the reviews in the video reviews area, you can find other people that are teaching you the games. And there's some pretty good ones out there. But instead, what I'm going to do is talk about it more like I would as a college professor, because, well, that's what I am. So I'm going to take a topic and explore that topic a little bit, give you some compare and contrast. It's not my job or my goal to try and list every single game in a category, but instead what I'm going to do is provide some highlights. So, for example, on this episode, I'm going to be talking about Catacombs. Catacombs is a fairly new game that excited me a lot. It was actually the game that got me to say, hey, let's do a video again. But I'm going to be comparing and contrasting Catacombs with some other games that are about flicking things, like Tumblin Dice and Pitchcar and Crokinole. And so what I'm going to do is show you each of those games, talk a little bit about their main features, and then compare and contrast Catacombs to these other games. So it's not going to be so much about helping you decide if a specific game should go in your library, but more about helping you decide about your game collection and helping you decide about order of bringing games to the table. I'll be talking a lot about introducing people to games. So, for example, I may take an episode and say, well, here's a way to get people from this game up to this more complex game through a series of things. Or I'll take a specific mechanic and look at a few different games and how they implement that mechanic and what's more or less effective. So I'm going to be exploring board games from a slightly more, I guess, intellectual angle, and ties in with what I do, and that's something that's interesting to me. That's something that's a bit more of a challenge than just the typical, let's see what's inside the box. So anyway, with that, let's see what's inside these boxes. So this is Tumblin Dice. This is an old version of Tumblin Dice. There's a new one out that's a little bit smaller. There's also Tumblin Dice Jr., which is a lot smaller, and I didn't find it nearly as interesting. So what Tumblin Dice is, it's a nice wooden game. It's got these stairs that go down, and these little platforms out here. And all the platforms have a number, say 0 times dice, 1, 2, 3, and 4 times the dice. What you do on your turn is you take one of your dice, you put it on the platform, and you flip it. And the goal is to try and get it to stay out here, because then it'll score points at the end of the round. The points it's going to score is the number on the top times the multiplier on the platform. And then the next person goes, and then the person after that goes, and the one after that goes. And so that's the way it goes. You take turns flicking your dice and trying to knock the other people off and keep yours on the platform. Someone gets one of these out on these 4 times areas, well, that's a lot, especially if you can do that. And then all of a sudden it becomes a cooperative game. If everyone beat on that guy as you try to knock that piece off the board. So it's an easy game to explain. I've brought this out in the library a number of times, and people have really taken to it quickly. It will play a wide variety of ages because there's a lot of luck involved. You can't really control what number is going to come up. And so it's got more luck than other games where the disc is just a disc. It's not a numeric piece. So they're clever in that they have lowered the barricade to entry to this game. The flip side of that is that you can practice and practice and practice, and while you can get dice, you can practice getting the dice to the 4 times area. If you can't manage to practice getting them to land on the 6, well, then you can be out of luck. And so, literally, out of luck. A lot of luck in the game. Because of that, it's a good family game. So the next game we're going to talk about is Pitchcar. Now in Pitchcar, what you're doing is you're flicking these little cars. I mean, you can probably already tell what's going to happen when I play this game. It's pretty simple. What you do is you take a car and you flick it and you go vroom, and you can make the vrooming noises as well. That's actually required. You go vroom, 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 and then you continue flicking the cars around the track, trying to be the first one home. Vroom, so it kind of careens off the boundaries. If it goes out, you put it back on the board. And there's a number of house rules you can play with the game. But the nice thing about Pitchcar is it's very easy to grasp. It can be frustrating though, because these little jigsaw pieces, while it looks very nice, they don't always quite line up, and so you may end up creating a ramp or something that makes it very easy for people to go vroom and off the board, and then they crash and everyone screams because that's what they like. But anyway, that's Pitchcar. Pretty simple game, very accessible, and it looks great when it's laid out on a table. It'll draw people over, and it'll play up to 8 people at one time. Now this gorgeous game is Crokinole. Crokinole is a folk game, but is in line with the games we've been looking at. It's a flicking game. And what's going to go on in Crokinole? It's designed for 4 players to be played in teams of 2. So these people are on a team and these people are on the team. So you can see the board is segmented into 4 areas, 4 quadrants by these lines. Each player is going to sit at one quadrant. And what they're going to do on their turn is they're going to take one of these little wooden discs and put it somewhere on the line that's in front of them. They can't go beyond their 2 sidelines. And they're going to flick the disc, trying to get it in the hole or in the center, like so. And then the next player will go. Now, the second rule in play is that if there is a piece from the other team in play, you have to hit it. If you don't hit it, your piece is taken off the board. So this is pretty tough. This player is going to have to somehow get in here and hit that piece to stay alive. Now, one of the funny rules in this game is the one cheek rule, meaning that you're going to be sitting in a chair and one cheek must remain in contact with that chair at all times. So anyway, this person's going to go, they're going to line up a shot, and they're going to try and hit that piece in order to stay in the game. If they fail, or their piece goes off the board, their piece is taken off the board. If they hit a friendly piece along the way, but still don't hit any of the opponents, their piece is taken off, and so is the friendly piece that they hit. And then the other side will get a shot, and since there's no opposing pieces on the board, the other side can just try and shoot right in the middle. Now, scoring, the way it works is if you get in the hole, it's 20 points and you take the piece off the board. and then you're going to score 15 points, 10 points, and 5 points for pieces that end up in these different areas. And you balance out the score. So if one side has 45 points and one side has 15 points, you subtract the two, so one side just ends up with 30 points for that round. So that's the way scoring works. And you play to 100 points. And I found it was funny, when I first got the PlayStation 2, when it first came out, I had a party where I had the PlayStation 2. I'd also just gotten this Crokinole board as a gift. And so we had them both out, and very shortly into the evening, no one was playing the PlayStation 2 and everyone was standing in line to play Crokinole. There's something about the physical manipulation of the game that is a joy to play. People can get very good at this if they're Crokinole championships, and what you'll see is each person will just put it into the hole, one right after another, just hole, 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 until someone misses the hole, and that team's probably going to lose. So that's Crokinole. Like that. Ha! So that brings us to the new game for this week, Catacombs. And so what's going to go on in Catacombs is you're going to go on a series of adventures. Now, you're going to randomly set up the game with some cards. The game will tell you how to do that. The game has 3 of these boards, and each board is double-sided. And each board has different holes in it. And you might say, well, is it the same board, just different graphics? Well, no, it's not, because the monsters start on one side of the board, as indicated by this line. The heroes start over here. And so you can see the position of the holes on the other side are different, based upon where the heroes and the monsters start. So that does make it 6 different boards. You're going to set up the board by drawing a card, which is going to tell you what bad guys go on the board. And the person playing the bad guys gets to set them up on this side. And then the heroes will set themselves up on this side of the board. And then you're off. And the way it goes is the heroes are going to start, and they're going to flick their own hero disc. And the basic idea is that if a hero hits something, it does a point of damage to it. Some monsters are big and take 2 points of damage, and you flip them over and they've taken damage. Other monsters are small and they just have 1 hit point, and when they take 1 hit, they're off the board. And so that's the way it goes. On a hero's turn, they line up the shot and they shoot, and everyone laughs at them if they mess up, and the next person can decide what to do. And now that's the big problem with this game, is that things go off the board very easily. So I suggest playing this on a really large table, so you're not crawling around the floor picking up pieces. If something goes on the board, you just put it back on the board from where it came. But if you're playing near the edge of a table, well, guess what's going to happen? Whee! The pieces go rumbling off. Now the game also has missile attacks, and so you have archers in the game, and there's players that are archers as well, and the archers use little bitty discs. So these are interesting in that they're not going to knock other pieces around, they're just going to hit something and maybe do damage. There are other things that throw fireballs, and fireballs are little bigger discs, and those fireballs actually have the potential of moving things around on the board. Moving things around is a critical part of the game, and so you're going to look as a player, you're going to say, well, not only can I hit that bad guy, but maybe push some others around. Now, if your player doesn't directly hit a bad guy, it doesn't do damage to it. But you can certainly use some strategy to knock people into better places for other people to hit. The players have to work together in this game. Now, each of the characters have a card and have some sort of special abilities. So the elf has the ability to shoot arrows, the wizard has spells, the barbarian can go rage, and the thief can take a second shot if they miss the first one. The bad guys, many of them have abilities as well. And there's lots of bad guy tokens. And so rather than just have a couple generic tokens, what they did is they gave you 1 token and stickers for each of the bad guys in the game. And so that's a nice touch. You can see what you're fighting. And when I play, I don't like to explain to the heroes what they're getting ready to face. They just see the monster, and then as they encounter special abilities of the monster, they then panic. The game also has items. The way it works is you have a couple rooms, and then you meet someone who sells you stuff, and then you have a couple more rooms, and then you have a healer, and then you have a big bad room, and then you meet the big bad person, and there's 4 of these available, and so the game's going to end in different ways. The Gorgon, for example, can shoot stone, turn people into stone, and kill them fairly easily, and so each of the big bad guys also has an impact throughout the dungeon. There are little question marks that stand in for certain bad guys based upon the big bad that's at the end of the dungeon. So Catacombs plays about an hour, and what's nice about the game is if you have 2 people and you start playing, well, you split up the 2, each person gets 2 good guys. And then if someone else comes up and wants to play, well, you can just give them one of the good guys. Say, here, play this one. And so it's easy to add players into the game, up to 5 players, 4 heroes, and one big bad. Now, of all the games we've seen here, this is the most complex by far. But it's also the one that tells the best story. So you have to decide, if you're wanting a game that can tell a story, that's got a narrative, and you're willing to take on the complexity, well, then you may want to look at Catacombs. I've heard people call it Descentinole, because it combines the monster-slaying dungeons of Descent along with the flicking of Crokinole. But if your flicking skills are no good, you're going to be frustrated by this game. So you have to decide if that's something that's interesting to you. You might have to decide, well, which of these games am I going to bring into my house? Well, the first thing I'll point you to is with Tumblin Dice. Because of its luck element, luck helps to negate skill. And so therefore, if you want a game that's going to be widely accessible and winnable by a variety of people of different skill levels, Tumblin Dice is your best pick. You can't really control what number that die lands on, but that's so much of the outcome. So it's still got all the fun flicking aspects of these other games, but the dice element allows it to be something that 7-year-old could use to beat grandma. And that'd be great, because of course that's what you're trying to do, is beat grandma. If you want a game that will draw people over and they will instantly understand exactly what's going on, Pitchcar is a good one for that, because Pitchcar's layout, you can have this big Pitchcar layout, and as soon as you watch one person flick a disc, you get the game. Your goal is driving cars around a racetrack and you flick discs to do it. And so it's good for sort of the bait games, if you would, when you want to put out a game and draw people over. Pitchcar works really well for that. I've used Tumblin Dice for that in libraries as well, but you have to explain it. Pitchcar, you see it, you get it, you understand what's going on. Crokinole is a game I generally leave out in my game room, because it's one that once people understand how to play, it's a great filler. I also find that it will draw in people of older generations who feel comfortable with that kind of game. I've had Christmas parties before, and before you know it, there's people standing 2-3 deep to get in line to try a Crokinole game. Its rules are a little complex. It's not quite as easily accessible as Pitchcar, but it's a very attractive game. And for someone that's not a quote-unquote gamer and maybe turned off by bright colors and theme, things like that, but they want something that really looks nice, Crokinole fits that bill. It's the most expensive of all these games. It'll cost you $100 to $200 for a reasonable Crokinole board. But it is something that's going to provide long-lasting fun, and it's something you can get very good at. It is a team game, though, and so you have to decide, are you going to have a situation where you're going to have teams? By the way, I did once take a Crokinole board and take 4 different colors of discs and have people play as solos, and it's chaotic. It's wacky. So it's actually a much better game as a team game. And that brings us to the new game for this episode, and that's Catacombs. Now, Catacombs is cool in a couple of ways. It's got theme, and so it's kind of like Pitchcar. If you watch Catacombs, you can kind of understand, oh, okay, you got heroes versus monsters. There's quite a bit of strategy and teamwork required to do well in the game. When I've heard people grouse about Catacombs and say it's too hard, what I think is, you probably didn't work as a group. You probably didn't think about the impact of what you're going to do. That said, Catacombs becomes dreadful if people take too long for their turns. It's something you want to have 10-second turns. And if you're the one running the monsters, don't take time at all. Just flick, 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 and have fun with it. It's a very well-balanced game. I've played 5 or 6 games of it now, and it's about 50-50, whether the heroes win or the monsters win, and it's very close each time, and so it's an exciting game. It does have some complexity, and so you've got to deal with some wonky rules, and pieces going off the board get pretty tiring, I have to say. I'd say that's my biggest grouse with Catacombs, is that if you get too into it, you're going to send pieces flying everywhere, you start losing pieces, and that gets a little old. But overall, one thing I like about the game is the time it takes, about an hour, is right for the engagement of the players. I feel at the end of the game, I've done what I needed to do, and it didn't drag on too long, as long as people take their turn quickly. So, that's 4 different flicking games. Hopefully you can decide which ones might be right for your collection. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Board Games with Scott. So hopefully you like the new format. I'll encourage you to head over to Board Game Geek, and there's a forum there where you can chime in. You can let me know what you thought about this, if you liked it or didn't like it. I also have a guild on Board Game Geek, and I've started a thread there asking for your ideas. And so if there's something you'd like me to study and talk about, bring it up there, because I've got a number of ideas, and most of the time in each episode it's going to be triggered by a new game. There's going to be some new game that's come on board that's hit me to the point where I've said, yeah, this game deserves to be looked at. And that's really where I am with my game collection. When I look at a new game, I decide, is this game going to be in my collection? Does it have a place? Or is it just a reworking of stuff we've already had? I don't take a lot of new games in my collection anymore because a lot of what we see is just a reworking of stuff we've already had. So when I find something that's like, yeah, this stands out in some ways, then I'll bring it to you. I'll compare and contrast it or look at mechanics and look at some aspect of it a little bit more in depth rather than just teach you the game. So hopefully if you made it this far, then you enjoyed what I had to say, and I can look forward to seeing you on the other side of a future episode of Board Games with Scott. Take care and bye-bye. On this episode of Board Games with Scott, it's flicking games. Flicking games.